straight. I'm guessing I don't have to tell you that, either because you know me or because you kind of assume it. And we just kind of assume that people are straight until we know otherwise. We have normalized heterosexuality. So I remember the first time I was asked to look out for someone, and the person who asked me noted the description of who I was looking for and said that he was white. I was in my early 20s. I was working at Covenant House, which is not white space. My personal life wasn't especially white either, and yet when this woman asked me to look out for a white guy in his 40s, I was taken aback by the description. I realized if she hadn't said anything about skin tone, I'd have assumed he was white, which didn't make any sense in my location. I would nonetheless default to white, and her description immediately made me recognize that I had normalized whiteness, which she was disrupting. So, I'm straight. Straight isn't normal, and I'm not even sure it's all that common. At some point, it was revealed that 10% of the population is gay, but that's on this kind of weird gay-straight binary, which I don't think exists. The older I get, the more I see life in continuums or spectrums, maybe even not lines, more like color wheels. We can say on one side of a line, if we want to kind of say, oh, there's one side and then there's the other side, as long as we sort of recognize that everybody in between keeps moving and blending, and that we kind of just make this whole thing big and round and colorful. Because I'm straight, I was hesitating to preach at all on this Pride Sunday. I didn't last year. Reverend Jew did. I didn't the year before either. But this year I feel like those of us who like to think we're straight should probably say more than we have been. There is an intentional campaign in our federal and many state governments to erase people who identify in any way as queer. I'll tell you, right now, right in northern New Jersey, 2 congregations got together to teach OWL, which is a sexuality education program, really teaching about all the different ways that we enter relationships, all the different ways we love. Because of that program, the Moms of Liberty started sending death threats to the ministers, one of whom is trans, and to the religious educators. And it got so serious that one of the educators had to quit her job and hide. So maybe it's time for those of us who like to think we're straight to speak up. We need to note that Moms for Liberty and other hate groups are not keeping our children safe. They're not keeping us safe, and we abhor their tactics and goals. And we should acknowledge that there isn't as much us and them as those Moms for Liberty like to think there is, because life isn't binary, and they, like everyone else, are part of this continuum, the color wheel, where people mix and blend. And one day I hope you'll talk about the everything, everywhere, all at once-ness of the world right now, but holding the suffering and the joy and the pride and the protest of life these days and all of our days is where we are now. For now, we are going to listen to Karishma's story and lean into the spectrum of the human experience, of which we are all a part.
So I accidentally came out in a homily that I delivered at Summer Seminary, which is a Unitarian Universalist program for youth considering becoming religious professionals. And I was about 17. I had recently been leaning into my identity as a queer woman of color, and I said as much. I forgot, however, that I hadn't mentioned this fact to my parents yet, who were watching the live stream from their couch a few time zones away. So, when my dad picked me up from the airport a week later, he brought it up almost immediately. So I wanted to ask, what does queer mean to you? That's how he phrased it. Now, I've flirted with a lot of different labels throughout the years, from ally to bisexual to lesbian, but none of them ever felt quite right. And each has a special place in my heart for the communities I've been in solidarity with and the identities I've claimed. But I keep returning to the word queer. Bell Hooks defines queer not about who you're having sex with, that can be a dimension of it, but queer as being about the self that is at odds with everything around it and has to invent it and create and find a place to speak and to thrive and to live. Every year around this time, as corporations turn their logos into rainbows and pride events are planned throughout the city, I like to remind people that the first pride was a protest, a rebellion, an uprising. It wasn't a parade like the one that we'll be joining in a few weeks. It started out like any other night of that era, a gay bar full of people inventing and creating and finding a place to speak and to thrive and to live. But state repression and violence, sparked by a police raid on the bar, quickly turned that space of joy and celebration into a night of resistance that we still commemorate today, over 50 years later. Today, Pride is a celebration of loving, of being, of dreaming a better world. But it is also still a protest, this year more than ever. And even though I've lived in New York for a few years now, it still feels surreal to talk about Stonewall and to talk about that night, here just a few subway stops away from where that uprising took place. Over this past year, Christopher Park and the Stonewall National Monument have become a regular part of my weekly routine. As I walked past them on my way to and from the subway, as a part of my commute to NYU's Center for Global Spiritual Life. When I first visited Stonewall as a teenager on a spring break trip to New York, I was in awe of the history of that place, where Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera and numerous other queer and trans folks resisted against state imperialism and police brutality. As a young queer person, I was overwhelmed with gratitude for their legacy. And when I moved to New York a few years ago, my partner and I decided to stop by the Stonewall Inn for a drink. It was the week, if you remember, when Tennessee had passed a law banning drag performances. And there happened to be a drag queen performing there that night. And that performance, besides being amazing, was also incredibly meaningful for my partner, who is genderqueer and grew up in Tennessee. It felt like such a place of powerful resistance, a reminder that while some places were going backwards, we were still moving forward. But these days, the reversal of laws and regulations that protect LGBTQ people is not just limited to elsewhere. In February, the Trump administration had the words queer and transgender removed from the official Stonewall National Monument webpage. And while we don't know the exact number, because the federal government doesn't collect the data accurately or regularly, hate crimes against LGBTQ+ people are once again on the rise. Queer and trans people are being erased quite literally from our history and from this world. but we will not let them. Now when I walk by Christopher Park, the sign at the entrance of the park is covered in trans pride stickers, and trans pride flags flutter in the breeze, the blue and the pink and the white stripes, a visible reminder that despite anyone's best efforts, trans people can never be erased. Each week, the stickers are removed in the regular graffiti cleanse, and each week, more appear. When I pass by the Stonewall Inn, or even just any pride flag on the street, I'm reminded of the legacy of the queer and trans people who have become before me, especially the legacy of trans women like Sylvia Rivera and Black trans women like Marsha P. Johnson, both of whom were at Stonewall that night. So when I use the word queer to describe my sexuality, but even more than that, I use the word to describe how I live in this world as a human being. And I'm reminded of the rallying cry that the personal is political. My personhood is inherent to my queerness, and my queerness is inherent to my personhood. I feel my queerness in my bones as part of that self that is at odds with everything around it and has to invent it and find a place to speak and to thrive and to live. And I've had conversations with some LGBT elders about the word queer. Not everyone uses it. Some have too many memories of it being used as a weapon against them to have it sit right with their soul. My middle school counselor hated the word queer because for him, queer meant strange and odd. And that's still the first definition that comes up when you Google it. But for me, a mixed race person of color, a gender expansive relationship anarchist, and of course a Unitarian Universalist, queer is the perfect word to describe not just my sexuality, but every part of me and what I embody. And as I've studied queer theology in seminary, I've actually become more and more convinced that Unitarian Universalism itself is a queer faith. You can applaud for that one. Because we are defined by not a creed passed down through generations, but by the real world commitments we make to each other in the present. Unitarian Universalism queers the literal idea of theology itself, not requiring the theos, the God, to do the logos, the talk. Our God talk includes the atheists, the agnostics, the polytheists, and all who endeavor to engage in this search for truth and meaning. My queerness and my Unitarian Universalism are inextricably linked, informing each other at every bend on the road. I wouldn't be who I am without either of them. As Unitarian Universalists, we affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. We uphold values of equity and interdependence, grounded in abundant love. We don't tolerate, we celebrate. And on this Pride Sunday, on this first day of a month, but really more than that, of Pride, remember whoever you are, whomever you love, wherever you are on this journey, we welcome you.